The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
This week's guest is President Judge of Montgomery County Court of Common Pleas, Carolyn Carluccio, the first ever female president judge in Montgomery County history. She joins us today as the endorsed Republican candidate for Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. Her background is impressive. She earned her Bachelor of Arts from Dickinson College and her Juris Doctorate from the University of Delaware Law School. Upon becoming a lawyer, she began her legal career as a United States Attorney in the Justice Department, in charge of criminal prosecutions of large-scale drug dealers, bank robbers, and money launderers. Her work in the courtroom earned her recognition and praise from the United States Secret Service, the DEA, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. After her federal service, Judge Carluccio became the first ever female chief public defender for Montgomery County, where she managed a team of 35 staff attorneys. She has the unique experience in her public service of seeing both sides of the criminal justice system. In 2009, she was elected to the Court of Common Pleas in Montgomery County, where she handled criminal, civil, and family law cases. After her election to the presidency of the Court of Common Pleas, she was also honored to serve as the president of the 2,000-member Montgomery County Bar Association. In addition to being endorsed as the Republican candidate for Supreme Court by the Republican State Committee, Judge Carluccio received the Pennsylvania Bar Association's highest designation as, quote, highly recommended for Justice of the Supreme Court. Judge Carluccio was born and raised in Montgomery County and currently lives in Bluebell with her husband, Tom, and together they have 3 adult children. We look forward to her appearance on the show today and look forward to giving you her qualifications for this high office.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial. The area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Judge, welcome to the Volpe Report.
It's a pleasure to be here, Chuck. Thank you.
Well, thank you for making time. I know, having been a candidate myself, Pennsylvania is a big state. I know you're getting around a lot, and I know you're going to Republican County dinner in Luzerne later this evening. And for our audience's benefit, they've heard your wonderful open and your credentials, and we'll get to that in a second. Mm-hmm. But let's start with the easiest question of all. I have to, my political history as a student of it, I have to say, as I say this question, the only person in history that botched this question was Ted Kennedy in 1980 when he was running for president. On 60 Minutes, he was asked, why do you want to be president? Apparently, it had never occurred to him. Like, he had literally, they said that was a big detriment in his campaign. So we're going to put you to that same test. Why do you want to be a Supreme Court justice?
Well, it's not an easy question, so I can see why he might have botched that question. Yeah. It wasn't something that was on my radar. It was not something. I'd become president judge of the 3rd largest and busiest court in the state. And once I got there, I thought I'd really reached where I wanted to be. I've been so fortunate to have jobs I've truly loved in the law, and I think that's a rare thing. But when I became the president judge of Montgomery County, people started to call me. And they said, we need you to do this. And my initial reaction was, are you sure me? But the more I realized people had faith in me, and I was distressed by what was going on in our courts, and I felt as if I could really fill a void there. I could bring balance to that court. And the more people I talked to, I became convinced that maybe I can do this. And I'm running to bring balance to this court.
Well, let me say that this show, believe it or not, is 10 years. Judge.
Good for you.
And I want to say maybe 7 years ago, we had one of the most fundamental and watershed moments in the history of our courts in Pennsylvania. We had a unique situation where 3 seats opened up on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So literally, we ended up with 6 candidates, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans. I had all of them on this show. We're going way back in the day. But I had commented to people at that time that I think the Democrats had put more effort, more money, more good political minds, more organization. I could see it in the way they presented themselves in the show, the way their campaigns had contacted the network and got on the show, versus the Republican candidates. My fear, if you will, was that they were going to be outmanned because the counties they were like Cumberland and places they were coming from, they didn't have the name recognition in the media markets. The long story short, I made it a long story, is that they swept. Historically, it never happened. They swept all three. The Democrats did, which put it at 5-2 as far as the Supreme Court majority. So the power of that election swing has put the Republican Party kind of in arrears, so to speak. So as we talk about you, I think one of your qualifications that's very important to actually winning statewide, not only your credentials and your message, you come from Montgomery County, as you said, the third largest. You're the president judge of Montgomery County. You were a chief public defender in Montgomery County, and you were further honored by being elected president of the 2,000-member Bar Association of Montgomery County. So one of the major disadvantages past Republicans had, you don't have. So talk about your experience in Montgomery County and what you've done there as president judge.
So that's a really important piece of why I'm running and why I'm really fit for this position. I want to go back to something you said. That was 2015 when the Republicans weren't paying attention and lost those 3 seats. So that's been, now we're 2023. It's been a while. And that 5-2 is where we don't have balance. And that's where we have the decisions that we've had. And Lady Justice holds scales of justice for a reason, because people expect balance on their courts, and that's what's become out of sync. And that's something I'm trying to fulfill. And by doing that, as the president judge of Montgomery County, first of all, I was unanimously elected by a bench that was more Democrats than Republicans in a county that is run by Democrats. So for me to get the votes of every single judge on my bench meant a lot to me. It meant that they did not vote for me because of my politics. They voted for me because they understood I could get the job done. And that's exactly what I did as president judge. First thing I did was open the courts up. It was after COVID. Everything had been shut down for nearly 2 years in our county. I opened up the courts. I brought back in jurors, and we actually had a case flow that we could handle. Our backlogs were really bad. And I changed the way we did business in both the criminal and the civil divisions. I was able to do that because I understood case flow management. I also had an interesting discussion. We were back in, everything was working really well. We were starting to pick up pace. There had not been masking in a while. And the head of our county commissioners, who was Dr. Val Arkush, called me and said, you know, I think it's Friday afternoon. We're going to mask everybody on Monday because the numbers have spiked. And right away I said, you're not going to mask my employees. She said, oh yeah, the court employees, they're county employees. I said, no. I said, first of all, this is Friday afternoon and we can't do this. And second of all, I'm not mandating masking. Everything is moving. People feel good. They feel confident. And her response was kind of like, well, I'm a doctor. And my response was, I'm the president judge. And what happened was nobody masked in our county because it was realized that the science did not support it at that point in time. So I was able to make a difference in our county, not just in the courts and my employees, but in our county. And as the president judge, my job is really supervisory and administratively to oversee the 24 judges on my bench and the 30 magisterial district judges, in addition to our treatment courts, our domestic relations, our probation. And that role is the same role that the Supreme Court fills, because they are administratively and supervisory supervising all the courts and the judges in the state. So I am already performing those duties in the third largest county in the state. That's something that nobody else running or nobody else sitting on the Supreme Court has had that experience. So I am uniquely qualified in that regard also.
That was an excellent answer, Judge, and it speaks to your experience that you bring forth for this office and qualification, I'm sure, and I'm glad our viewers got to hear that answer. Because my next question is going to kind of be another longer answer by you, I think we're going to take our commercial break at this point, and I have a 3.5-minute view my audience will hear. So we'll take this break. Again, we're here today with President Judge of Montgomery County Court of Common Pleas, Carolyn Carluccio. She is the Republican-endorsed candidate for Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. And something else that I'll talk to her a little bit about later, she has the highest designation by the Pennsylvania Bar Association, highly recommended for this office. That's a rare qualification, and that means her skills as a judge and as an attorney, and her knowledge of the law is at the highest level according to her peers in the Pennsylvania Bar Association. So with that, we will take this break, and we'll be back right after my view, which runs about 3.5 minutes. As my audience is well aware, I have done a number of views on the progressive left's boogeymen. Boogeyman is a pejorative term I use when the Democratic progressive left cannot intellectually defend their views. Then they bring out boogeymen. One of my favorites is on the climate apocalypse and the Democratic left scolding extortion and government coercion to eliminate all fossil fuel production, including natural gas, by the way, which a number of progressive European countries have reclassified as green energy. Today's specific topic is electric cars and the Biden administration's hypocrisy. Those paragons of virtue signaling on the left forget to mention that billions of tons of the Earth's crust will be destroyed in mining operations for the raw materials that go into the batteries. They also forget to mention that hundreds of children are dying in mining operations in the Congo for cobalt, an essential ingredient to the batteries. Amazingly, the progressive left project an intellectual persona, but I refer to them as dullards, because that's what I call anyone who can only see their goal and remain oblivious to collateral damage. Like someone that tries to play chess and can only see one move ahead and stumbles into a checkmate. In her presentation before the House Appropriations Subcommittee, the Secretary of the Interior, Deborah Haaland, came off like most of the Democratic progressive left when questioned on electric batteries. Haaland repeatedly gave the impression, in her rote answers and blank stares, of someone for whom the lights are on, but no one is home. She demonstrated either ignorance or intentional disingenuity about the policies of her own department. When asked by Congressman Ryan Zinke, himself a former Secretary of the Interior, question, "Are you aware that China controls, by proxy production, the supply chain of critical minerals that are critical to both electric vehicles and our defense?" Haaland responded by thanking him for the information, as if she were expecting the question on a midterm exam. I will now quote from the Washington Examiner editorial on the subject. Quote, "Where do electric vehicle batteries come from? Secretary Deb Haaland seems to think maybe they come from the rare earth fairy. The Biden administration gives a great deal of lip service to energy independence and simultaneously makes policies aimed at a so-called clean energy transition, but the two are not compatible. The latter involves pushing everyone toward using windmills, solar panels, and electric vehicles. At the same time, under Haaland, the Interior Department has been blocking domestic mining projects, without which any clean energy transition is just a fairy tale. In short, a green energy future is probably impossible under the best circumstances, given the scarcity of domestic lithium mining. There's only one lithium mine in the entire country. A pro-electric vehicle policy only increases U.S. dependence on China and decreases U.S. energy production. Because of our compromised defense posture, what happens if China invades Taiwan?" Welcome back. Again, we're here today with President Judge of Montgomery County, Carolyn Carluccio, who is running as the endorsed Republican candidate for Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. I think we all know in Pennsylvania how important this office is and how our rights can be affected in Pennsylvania by judgments and rulings of the Supreme Court. So finding out about those candidates are important. We're very pleased to have you in studio today, Judge. Let's talk a little bit. We talked a little bit about your Montgomery County experience. You gave a wonderful answer. Let's backtrack a bit. Before that, you were a federal prosecutor.
I was.
An assistant United States attorney. You were charged with prosecuting money launderers, drug dealers, some pretty dangerous criminals. So we had mentioned almost in passing that you were also the chief public defender in Montgomery County. So I'm going to say, in my experience, you have one of the most unique set of qualifications. You prosecuted criminals and then defended accused defendants. So you've seen, from a trial standpoint, I see why the Pennsylvania Bar made you highly qualified. Okay. So talk about your federal prosecutorial experience.
So for nearly 9 years, I was an assistant United States attorney in the District of Delaware. That's the state of Delaware. And it was a relatively small office, which gave me the ability to work in almost every area of the office. I was assigned to the criminal division, so it did give me, I did a lot of money launderers, structuring, bank robbers, drug dealers. I was in the drug division, and it taught me how to be a trial attorney. We worked the case with the agencies. I represented the U.S. Army. I represented DEA, ATF, the FBI, and I worked with the agencies, sometimes for years, to build up the case. I did a lot of healthcare fraud. Of course, with every president became a new focus for our office. And by the time I was ready to leave, I was doing a lot of healthcare fraud, which was interesting. I did the first case in the country that prosecuted a billing company and an ambulance company for Medicare and Medicaid fraud. That was a case that took years to investigate, and then we took it to a 2-week-long trial, jury trial. Then it gets appealed. You argue it before the Third Circuit Court of Appeals and write your brief for the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. It was a great experience. I actually met my husband prosecuting that case.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mentioned in your open, your husband is Tom?
Yes, he is.
Yeah. Personal things matter to voters. So how did you meet your husband?
So my husband and I went to law school together too many years ago to tell you, and I was actually married before. I had 2 little boys, and circumstances out of my control, I was no longer married. And Tom came back into my life after having been in a study group together, and we prosecuted this case together. We worked the case. He was a deputy attorney general. I was the federal prosecutor, and we ended up getting married before the case went to trial. That tells you how long it takes a case to get to trial.
Yes, I'm aware.
He went on and had another boy, and he has been my biggest supporter during this whole process, as have my 3 boys.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you again, checking boxes. You were born and raised in Montgomery County.
I was.
You live in Bluebell now. You always
do.
have to get the family segment
Yes.
when a political candidate is here.
So that's such an important piece to who I am. And my father was a first-generation Italian, and he came here. His family's from Sicily, Sciacca, Sicily. And my mother is a very proud Irish woman. And what I say about that, and I'm sure there are viewers that have a Irish-Italian mix in the household, is we were raised in a certain way. We were raised in a house that was full of love, but it was also very strict. My father had some definite rules. We never crossed him. He didn't have to raise his voice. We knew that when my father meant business, we had to comply. And some of those rules were, I think, what makes me who I am today. We always, as a family, did things. We always went to church together on Sunday morning. There was no option there. It was something we always did. We also always had dinner together, and it was at 6 o'clock we'd have dinner. And finally, my father taught me from a very young age that you always do the right thing. And the way I learned it initially was I remember being very young and getting too much change back from a cashier. And I thought I'd hit the jackpot, a couple extra quarters. I was doing really well. And he said, absolutely not. That's not yours. It's not the right thing. You return the money. And that lesson, although it sounds so simplistic, Chuck, it is the basis of so much of what we need to be teaching our children. And I applied that lesson in what I do today on the bench. I always do the right thing, which in my case means I follow the law. And sometimes I don't like the law, but I know that my job is to follow it. So I do that because it's the right thing.
Well, before I ask you the follow-up question about that specific point that is relevant to voters, I've done 10 years of shows, Judge. I've had hundreds of guests. And you're the first one that I share a Sicilian heritage. Believe it or not.
I didn't even know that.
Montedoro, Sicily, is where my family originally was from. So we share that in common.
My father, I'll tell you, the Sicilian, you may share this also. I get my work ethic from him. My father is 92 years old, and he still works every day.
Oh, God bless.
He exercises almost every day, and he does it in his bathroom. So it's the deep knee bends and the arm rolls, but he does it. And he's been battling stage 4 cancer. And it has not stopped him. I'm going to tell you, he gets up every morning. He goes into work when he can. And to me, I look at him, and some days when I don't feel like it, I think, my father's doing this. I certainly can.
No kidding.
He's amazing. He has
God
really
bless.
been, and he's such a good man. He's such a good man.
Well, not to get too family and too personal, I'm envious. I lost my dad at a young age, 51 exactly. But the reason it's even relevant to the show, I remember I had said earlier, a long time ago, I was a trial lawyer. Mm-hmm. Well, he's now gone 35 years. And within several years after his passing, I had to make a choice for the family, either take over the insurance business that we currently have. I could not do both and maintain a law practice.
Right.
So I kind of I never left the impression, the profession. I still am a lawyer. I keep up with my CLE credits and all of that. But just a reminder that you were very fortunate to have your father for so long in your life. So again,
Thank
God
you.
bless,
I agree.
and I wish
Thank
you
you.
well in our prayers. Now, but back to the question about your qualifications and what you were talking about earlier is that you're somewhat uniquely qualified. You've seen it from both sides, and your experience as a federal prosecutor and your public defender experience. How do you kind of merge those? Because look, you're talking about going from, some would say, to the dark side, from the side of light, although some of my closest friends are defenders and criminal defense lawyers. And thank God we have such quality ones in our system. So the people, I'll just throw this out. One person, I had done criminal defense work, and some said, how could you defend people like that? I said, well, first of all, some of them are innocent, and they're unjustly accused. But I said, the other thing that criminal defense lawyers do for the sanctity of our system is that they make the prosecution prove their case. Exactly. And if we don't make prosecutors prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, we jeopardize all of our freedoms that we enjoy as Americans. So that's an essential service. So even though some people say, well, people look askance sometimes at defense lawyers, but you are inoculated since you were first for 9 years a federal prosecutor. But how do you merge those, and how does that make you a better judge?
So you're not the first person to say that to me. I've got that. When I became the chief public defender, people say, you're doing what? You're going from, and what it did really was, I'd already done the prosecution side for 9 years, and I came back, and criminal defendants are entitled, they have a constitutional right to a defense. Right. And that's what I did. And I held the prosecution to proving every element of the offense beyond a reasonable doubt. And if there were certain offenses they could not prove, then certainly that person was not entitled to be charged with it. So that's what we really did. We held them to their burden, which is a constitutionally protected right of our citizens in this Commonwealth and in this country. And that was important. And it gave me the ability to be able to protect, I understand how to protect the people in the Commonwealth, while at the same time protecting the rights of those that are charged. And that's important to know and to have that balance again.
Well, as you and I, Judge, talked off camera a bit, and this is just a fundamental belief I have, and I've talked to people, I've supported candidates, not just for Supreme Court of Pennsylvania or Superior Court or Commonwealth Court, but even for courts of common pleas. I don't understand, as a former trial lawyer myself, that should be a mandated qualification. You should have picked a jury. You should have had to try a case. You should be familiar with the rules of evidence. For example, if you don't know what a motion in limine is, you have no business being a court of common pleas judge. I understand family law is a little different and all that, but when you're talking about guilt and innocence in criminal trials or big civil trials where it's a preponderance of the evidence, it's important as a judge, when objections are being made, their job is to not grade performances, of course, as a judge by the plaintiff or defense lawyer or the prosecutor or the criminal defense lawyer. You're there to ensure the jury gets the facts as they should. Nothing prejudicial it comes in, and limiting the lawyers. Well, how can you do that unless you have your type of experience? I don't understand how people run for judge or even higher appellate court without knowing what goes on in a trial.
I don't understand why you'd want to do it if you don't have that experience, because I think when you come to a job, when you're good at it, you're going to love it. And when you love it, you're going to be good at it. And when I first sat on the bench, I knew the rules of evidence inside and out. And I can remember I was put in the family division, which I'd had no experience in. I'd never even taken a class in family law. But I have life experience. And also, I remember talking to the lawyers in the family bar, saying to them, listen, I'm going to hold you to the rules of evidence. I'll work with you. I'll help you. But this is a court of law, and you are expected to know the rules of evidence. And it amazed me how many people did not, and how many judges actually didn't care or didn't know them well enough.
Well, I take comfort in knowing that you do and are a candidate. I'm sure that's one of the reasons the Bar Association has named you highly recommended. A great accomplishment. Now, let's talk about, I guess, from a different perspective. There are fundamental discussions, Judge, as you're aware. I've discussed with other candidates on this show for previous years, including Commonwealth Court President Justice Kevin Bropson, who was elevated and won for the Supreme Court. We talked about a fundamental issue, and that is, do you believe I would say an originalist, but our audience won't know. Do you believe that the Constitution is something to be followed and to be interpreted, but as the basic pillars and framework for that deliberation? Or do you think that it is an amorphous document that is kind of can be molded to the times? We live in an era, I have done views, Judge, on a phenomenon that's actually been called presentism, which is reviewing the past through the lens of the future. My feeling is, I admit to being a conservative, is that too many of our judges legislate from the bench by, well, this is what they meant or would have meant if, well, no, this is what the law is, and these are the rights which were given under the Constitution. People have an ability to amend that Constitution, and it's right there in the framework of how you can, if you need to keep up with the times, there's a remedy for that. But where do you see a judge's job as? Interpreting the laws as they're presented to you and what the Constitution allows for, or to kind of make your own call on interpreting the Constitution?
So I think this answer is so clear. I volunteer and teach sixth graders civics education. I've done it for the last 10 years in the Norristown Area School District. And I find that our sixth graders understand there are 3 branches of government better than some of the people that assume those roles. It's so interesting to know that the branch of government is the judicial branch that I sit in. And it's very clear that my job in the judicial branch is not to write the law. That is for the legislative branch. And we need to stay in our lanes. My job is to interpret and apply the law. My job is to uphold the Constitution. That is the bedrock of our society. This entire Commonwealth, this entire state was built on the Constitution. And if we are there to uphold that, and certainly not to legislate from the bench. To me, it's just as clear as it can be. And I think I've traveled throughout this entire Commonwealth, and the most common thing I hear from people is a frustration that the judicial branch of government doesn't understand where their lane is. And they're very frustrated by judges who decide to write the law when they don't like the way it is, and to change it.
Well, it gets back to what we talked about, how important judicial elections are, Judge. And before we leave, I would like you to look to the middle camera. And I know you've made a few closing arguments in your time. So in about 2 minutes or so, talk to that middle camera and tell the voters in the Republican primary, because you're only on the Republican ballot, why they should vote for you for Supreme Court.
I'll do that. Thank you very much. I believe that the voters in Pennsylvania have a choice during this primary, and that I hope that you vote for Carolyn Carluccio for this position. I am the only candidate running that's been highly recommended by the Bar Association. I'm the only candidate who's not lost a race. I'm the only candidate that can win in November. I have the experience, I have the ethical standards, which the Supreme Court requires somebody who is above reproach, and I think that I fulfill that role. I'm the person that you need to fulfill this role and to win the primary this year.
Well, thank you, Judge. We are here today again with the President Judge of Montgomery County Court of Common Pleas, Carolyn Carluccio, highly recommended by the Pennsylvania Bar Association to ascend from her current position to become Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. That journey will begin with the victory in the primary. She is also the endorsed Republican candidate statewide for that office. You've heard about her qualifications and her views on issues and matters. She talked very frankly and candidly. In my experience interviewing candidates on this show, her qualifications are exceptional. I can't remember of having had a 9-year federal prosecutor and then later on a public defender, having seen both sides. So you now have heard her qualifications. Of course, get out and vote on Tuesday, May the 16th for whatever candidate you should choose. That's your great right in this great country. But now you know of her qualifications. Thanks for joining us.